Got three. Do you have an image now? Do you have my image now? Good to know. If I were you, I would mute 1, 2, and 3.
All right. You want to get started? Okay. Ooh, that's really loud. Thank you. It's good to be heard. Thank you all for coming tonight. Thanks for all the citizens of Norwalk that are here. We might also have some people in the house from Cumming, Carlisle, and other parts of Warren County. So thank you all for coming to hear about the courthouse, jail, building project, and the bond issue that'll be coming up on August 7th. Just some introductions. I'm Tom Phillips. I'm mayor here in Norwalk. We also have a few city council members here. We have Stephanie Riva, Ed Kuhl, and Brian Baker. I didn't see anybody else here, so we won't introduce those folks. We have one member of Board of Supervisors here. Dean Yorty is here. Our city manager, Luke Nelson, is sitting back here. Our chief of police, Chief Staples, is here. And is there anybody else here from some of the other cities that might be elected officials? Seeing nobody, will go on. So this is an educational meeting. We want you to get out and vote, and you need the information to make an informed decision on that vote. So thanks again for coming tonight, hearing the presentation, and then for participating in the meeting. A couple ground rules for tonight. This is not a debate, so we're not going to get into a back and forth about the information that we're presenting tonight. Please hold all of your questions until the end. We'll have time at the end, and we'll take as many as you guys have until the school kicks us out, okay? So there will be plenty of time to ask questions. How did we get here tonight? So back at the beginning of the year, I heard a lot of conflicting information being passed around. It's going to be on the west side, it's going to be on the square, it's going to be on the south side of Indianola. There were who supported it, who was not supporting it. And so I decided to call a meeting of the three cities in Warren County that have law enforcement, police departments. That would be Carlisle, Indianola, and Norwalk. And the purpose of that was to form a work group so we could go through the process of where, what, and how much it's going to be to build this facility. So on March the 27th, we held our first meeting here in Norwalk. In attendance were all three mayors, all three city managers. We had city council members from all three cities. All three supervisors were there. Sheriff Voss was there, and County Attorney Doug Eichholz was there as well. At that meeting, we talked about location, number one, and there was a nice site on the west side of Indianola, and there was a site on the square where the courthouse and jail currently resides. A lot of discussion about that. A lot of discussion then about splitting the sites. And the question was asked, there are other counties that split sites. You know, their courthouse is still on the square. They moved the jail somewhere else. Why is that? So we asked our city managers to do some research on that particular issue. We kind of landed at that meeting to put it on the square, but we needed that additional information as far as if we were truly going to put it on the Indianola Square or not. And we asked Dean to contact Shive Hattery, who's their architect for the building, to see if a combined footprint could actually fit on the square, and try to start to have a few diagrams for our next meeting on what that looked like. So on May the 3rd, we held our second meeting. It was in Carlisle. We had all the same people there, and that showed up for the first meeting, which was great. It showed a combined effort by those three cities, and that they were interested and really cared about this subject. The city managers reported on the jail split and found that most of those counties that had split the jail off the courthouse from the square did so because of space constraints. They had old, architecturally, what do I want to say? Huh? Massive courthouses on the square, but they didn't have room to be able to expand their jail on that square, so they moved the jail to another location, kept the courthouse on the square. And I think I believe all of those counties that the city managers talked to said they didn't really like it. They didn't like the split because of the issues that came up because of transporting prisoners to and from jails, or from the jail to the courthouse. So the idea of splitting was not a good idea, according to a lot of the counties all the counties that we actually talked to. So we also that night saw some renderings and drawings of a facility that was on the square, and we realized that we could put an adequately sized facility on the square in Indianola. Also, the county at that point in time, well, a couple weeks earlier than this meeting, hired Northland to look at the financials involved with how to pay for it. And then on June the 20th, we held our third and final meeting. If I can get to that part on my drawing. So we held our final meeting on June the 20th. That was in Indianola. Again, same people were there that were at the previous two meetings. A lot of support and concern for this particular subject. We saw a final draft of the building, and Northland had a financial analysis of how we were going to pay for it. So that's how we got to this point and how we got to where we are today. So I'd like to introduce Randy Cairns. He's here to present to you what the building is going to look like and how we're going to pay for it.
Thanks, Mayor Phillips. As he said, this has been quite a journey. I got involved in the second committee back in 2016, so it's wonderful to see current activity moving us forward as well as everything else that all the committees have done. So you guys going to switch that? Or we'll go with it. Brief tech. Okay, so I'll dance a little bit. All right, so what we're going to talk about is, yeah, thank you. I'll talk about it a little bit. As the mayor said, we're going to just kind of present a lot of information. The committees did a lot of work. I mean, tremendous amount of work with both the architects, the designers, people trying to figure out, how to put it, where to put it. Looked at a lot of different properties, but I'll talk about the background, kind of where we came from, why we're here. Then we'll talk about the solution that's proposed on the bond for August 7th. And then, as Mayor Phillips said too, we'll talk about the cost, because obviously, there's no free lunch, regardless of what they want to tell you. Somebody's got to pay the bills somewhere along the way. So, and then at the end, we'll take a lot of questions, and people always have a lot of questions, so it's very good. It's just a matter of running through it, so. Getting there? There were two PowerPoints on there. Did you flip to the right one? Oh. Gotcha. Well, I can work with it. All right, so let's just keep going. You guys all know about the current courthouse, constructed in 1938. Addition was put on in 1988. And of course, it suffered from a lot of things that you would expect from an 80-year-old building. So, it's had problems with water, whether or not we have a 6-inch rain all in 30 minutes or not. That one, I'm sure, had a lot of problems, but by then, luckily, most people were moved out. the various problems with moisture, condensation, the basement leaks, air quality, odors, all kinds of stuff. I mean, we even unfortunately lost another tree on the square, so that doesn't help. But an 80-year-old building, while it is structurally sound, takes a lot to overhaul. So we did look at that particular opportunity as we looked at options and said, well, what happens if we, do like a lot of counties, add to what we have? But then when you start looking at how that building, if you haven't been in there, it's an interesting structure. The first floor starts sort of half a floor up. So then when you realize that all the compliance and all the things that we need to do today to meet the various regulations, you literally have to gut that building. So, moving floors, moving columns, changing foundations, all that kind of stuff. And then you still have the plumbing, the sewer, the water lines, the electrical, the air conditioner, everything else to do too, as well as still add the space you need. And that's the other thing. If you've been in some of these other historic buildings, which we toured quite a few on the second committee, we went to a lot of courthouses and jails both. It was kind of funny because you go to a beautiful building like Dallas and there's a post right in the middle of the room because the answer is, it's expensive to move that post. So you sit on one side or the other of it and go from there. So, but that building has had a lot of, again, for 80 years, it's had a lot of good use for us. So the main driver, of course, we know that we're out of space, predominantly both in the courts, but also in the jail. Our current jail had a capacity of 17. So it has been exceeded for years. And we've been housing folks out of county for quite a while too. But our current daily average is 40. So, and today it was down a little bit, and of course I asked on Friday why, and that's just because 4 of them went to prison. So they'll be back, but it'll be 2 to 5 years before they come back, because apparently these folks are just struggling habitually, and they're regular residents for us too. So we also know that building has, while it is only 31,000 square feet, and for those that don't know, I was always surprised too, because people didn't realize the jail was on the top. And it's the top floor. So you start going, well, you're kind of limited in what you can do there unless you do a major overhaul. But at the same time, you work through what you have to work with. Code violations, the state of Iowa passed a new code back in 2015 that affects quite a few things about jail housing. And included in that were everything from conditions to water pressure to separation of types of inmates. People understand a violent offender and a non-violent offender, male and females. Simple things like that, but there are actually quite a few classifications that you have to meet today to be compliant with the jail standards too. So we're still not there. Okay. Oh, I can't click either. So we'll keep going. We've had an escape or two. You've heard about those. We also, I think, had a suicide here not too long ago. So all those things, again, if you haven't been in our current jail or now that it's closed, you can see it most any time. It's the old standard jail with bars. Well, those have been not built for, decades, predominantly both for safety, but also for both the inmates and the sheriff's department, because, the people that have to work there are just as much at risk as the people that are inmates. And, we go through that issue.
Randy, you're gonna have to work with this one.
Can I click? There we go. All right, we'll make it happen. We'll make it work. All right. Yeah, well, yeah. Remember I said decay? Well, that's just some of it. Whoops, got to be at the mic. The decay that's in there, of course, is like a lot of things, time happens. So whether it's the outside steps, where it's the leaks that have corroded the generator, to the pipes, you name it. It's a pretty amazing building for what it is, or is not in this case. So make sure. There we go. Okay, I think I covered a lot of this. We talked about the square footage. We talked about that. Yep. Oh, go ahead. Sorry. Thank you. We talked about a variety of the limits to what we had, again, with the building itself. But then as we look to, what are the options and what are out there, we started with, like I said, the first committee started in 2015. Come on. Okay. The first committee started, this is really a test. I love this. How do you, and we were all set up to go. That's the irony of this too, so for like 20 minutes. But anyway, as I said, the first committee started in 2015. And both committees, as we went through this process, the bond failed, in May of 2016. And what we heard from people were things like, well, it didn't feel like there really was a plan. There weren't any renderings. There weren't any drawings. We didn't know where it was going to go. We didn't know anything about, kind of the situation, so to speak. We also heard that there was no word on if it was built somewhere else, which was that proposal. Well, what happens to the courthouse? So there was a lot of gaps in both people's education, but quite frankly, also in the planning itself to make sure that, people understood what that proposal was all about. So that also then, we know also that the courts, left the courthouse in June of 2016. They operated all over various counties for about a year and then came back in June of 2017 to their current location, temporary, out at the old Fusion Fitness down on 92. Also, I think it's West 2nd. So, are we back? Okay. Okay, that's good, that's good. Oh, there we are. Okay, so as we talked through that, they came back in June of 2017, which helped quite a lot because there were, to add compound the confusion, people had to go somewhere else for court. So they didn't know where they were supposed to go, and now that's how it handled. But the other issue we have, of course, is that inmate housing closed by the state jailer February of 2018. And so now, literally everybody, including the 17 that we could house, are being housed out of county. And that's both an expensive proposition, but it's also one you don't really want to do long term. Most counties will do that sometimes, depending on what they are. Some facilities, for example, are designed to handle certain types of inmates better than others. But again, long term, you just try to avoid that where you can. So, making sure I'm getting the right slide. Okay, so as I said, we built on the first committee's work, of course, because they did a lot of stuff. The architect did a lot of different versions and scenarios to take it through. We did the jail and courthouse visits. We also reached out to the Department of Justice, the Department of Corrections, and the State Jailer of Iowa to get more information on what modern jails are like and what they are. People have usually in their head a vision of something, but usually there's, concertina wire involved and walls and fences and things like that, which those are prisons. Now, it makes great stuff for movies and TV, but jails today look like any other office building with maybe some small windows depending on how they've structured it. And as I show you the example of one of the concepts that the architects came up with, when you do them even better than they used to the last 10 years, you don't even see that. It looks like an office building and has a nice, facade and everything else to it. So we also looked at incarceration rates. They're based on population, but they're also based on demographics and some other things. We're lucky in Warren County that we don't have the same incarceration rate. In fact, we're below the state average, but partly just because of the mix of what we do have in the county and what we don't have. So that's kind of a little bit different scenario than most. So, and then we also had a lot of meetings with the people that occupy the space about what do they need. So we met with the sheriff, the county attorney, the courts, the clerk of court, because they have to store, some records they have to store forever, which I think is just interesting, particularly certain types of evidence in certain types of cases. And I even said, well, what if after everybody's dead? And she's like, nope, Renee said, you got to keep it. So there you go. So that was interesting, even though today they're moving like all things to a digital platform where your paperwork is all, scanned in, but your evidence has to be kept. So, in our most recent meeting, actually we've had one we're meeting about every week to 2 weeks now, even as we refine both the layout that I'll show you, but also the actual configuration, because we've narrowed the square footage down to a manageable and understandable space. Well, now it's a question of how does it fit in this site on the square. So. And then, of course, as Mayor Phillips said, we tried locations all over the place. And, we tried east, we tried west, we tried south, we tried everywhere. And each of those properties had some characteristics that either, if the people would even sell it to us, because sometimes they would, but then when they found out what it was, they didn't want to. And other times it just wasn't available because either of, maybe a hazardous chemical situation or the other fact that it had to be in the city limits. And that's a fact that people forget, that while the jail can be located anywhere, if the courthouse is going to be with it, it has to be in the county seat. And it has to be in the city limits regardless, because you have to have city water pressure, city sewer, and internet. All are required by the Code 50, or Chapter 50 of the Code of Iowa. So it's kind of an important distinction to have in there too. The other part of all those things, as we looked at costs and we looked at some other stuff, we also tried to size it appropriately for where we think the population is and where it's going to go. And I'll show you a slide on that here in a minute. Yeah, good, that worked. We looked at, after gathering a ton of stuff, and I apologize, it's kind of an eye chart, but the idea with the slide was to take Warren County's growth, which has been highest since 2010. We based it directly off the census, so we pulled the numbers in for year over year and looked at the growth, and then said, okay, let's be conservative both in the numbers, because nobody wants to, be short, but you also don't want to overbuild, because the one theme that we saw when we toured these other jails is all these people built for 30-year windows, and they were maybe not even half full after 20 years. So that's a lot of expense sitting, or in a lot of cases just getting filled up with stuff, because stuff happens. And, it just wasn't being effective. And while we're lucky to have that space, because we need it temporarily, they would be sitting on, a lot of empty space if we weren't there. So we used a 2% growth factor and did that annually. So year over year, 2% growth all the way out to come up with these numbers. So, and that's kind of an interesting piece, because again, that tie directly to this next slide, which talks about that population and how does it tie to the actual number of inmates. So based on what we did at the time, because remember we started this in 2016, it actually showed that we should have been at 40 in 2016, and we were in the 30s. So the good news is we were conservative, but we weren't too far off. But as we map this out 20 years to 2036, again, it's looking like it's 77 inmates. And then if we go clear out, right now it's looking at 93. Now, again, my crystal ball is broken, but, based on what we see and the drivers that we know economically affecting Warren County or not, this is kind of the best information we have to go on. So, and it was good exercise, because I think it's critical to understand, how all these things tie together. And when you're talking about, millions of dollars, you kind of want to spend it well. So. Okay, so what's on the bond referendum is $29.9 million. You've probably heard that, I'm sure. The building currently is at 80,000 square feet. That includes 72 beds. That's the inmate housing itself. But sometimes people forget, too, this facility has holding cells, too. There's quite a few events, let's just call them, for lack of a better legal term, where people come in, they bond out literally once they see the judge, 23 hours and 59 minutes, they're gone. So they never really reach the inmate housing unit. So they don't count towards your daily population number either, but they absolutely count to all the work that the sheriff and the deputy has to go through. So it's important to have that space. The other nice thing about having that space is that it gives you some flexibility, because there's certain kinds of cells in these spaces, like a padded cell, also required by the Code of Iowa. You must have one padded cell, because some of these people come in and they have some confusion, let's just call it. So you have to deal with that, but it does give you a classification area. We also have 4 jury courtrooms planned today. There's 2 out at the Fusion building now, and 2 hearing rooms, so they're a lot smaller than what they are looking forward to. But also it includes some shell space, we call it, that allows for 2 more courtrooms to be added in the future. Because of the way the building is structured, we can essentially build the walls, but we don't finish the inside of it until you need it. So it's really a common practice depending on how your structure is laid out. So. Also some secure underground parking, because we have to dig a hole to get rid of the other courthouse. It's fairly easy just to extend that hole and make it the way we want. And then also it takes all of that, what I'll call law enforcement view and in duties, off of visual line of sight on the square, and you're now underground. So right now the current design has like a lot of these, this looks like a parking ramp entrance, and the sheriff will go down. That's where the inmate and the booking is, and then the processing of those inmates. So on that level, then you'll have your 911 communications. That has to be a secured facility. That was another code change in 2015. It has to survive an EF5 tornado now. So the lowest cost or the most likely and practical way to build those is to make them underground, because you can definitely make a hardened facility that way. On the first floor, which I'll touch on here in a minute too, is essentially ground floor. You walk right in, right off the square, no half steps, 5 steps up or any of that. And go right into, if you turn to the right, you'll go into the law enforcement area, and if you turn to the left, you'll go into the court area and the clerk of courts area. So we've also got facilities in there for emergency management, obviously the county attorney's offices, and then a variety of the different court functions that are in there. And then the second floor would be courts up above on their side, courtrooms themselves, and then the inmate housing above the sheriff on the other side. So here is one rendering, one concept of what they've come up with. The trees are kind of ghosted in so you can still see the building. They're actually working on another one right now too. And they're all out on the website, which we'll show you here at the end. But you can see the different designs that they've come up with to tie into the existing historical nature of the square, but yet also end up what we have a modern building both to maintain and operate. So then as we look at the layout, oops, There we go. This is kind of how it's set up. So if, as I said before, you come in on the east side, so this is your public entrance, and then to the, to the north is the jail and housing unit, the sheriff's office, and the courts here. This is what's called the Sally Port. That's where they bring in the inmates, and that's all underground. This also happens to be the great place that we have planned. If we need to expand, we can actually expand the housing unit right out over this with another 32-bed facility for inmates. So you don't have to build a new facility if we happen to exceed 88, which I'll touch on a little bit more of that in a minute. Yeah, that's about the highlights there. Okay, so consolidated facility was one of the biggest things we heard, and as the mayor introduced as well, there's risk with transportation. Obviously, there's risk to the inmate, but there's risk to the deputies as well. And even when you follow all the protocols that there are, you're still on the road, and accidents happen. So, the other day that semi hit the back of that gravel truck, and you just go, wow, I didn't want to be in any of that, but that was just an amazing event. So you realize that any time that you have to take an inmate anywhere, there's a risk. So the combined facility both is also, functionally efficient as well, because you're going to be able to leverage some of the spaces that you have together, so you don't have to build more hallways and more connections. And if it were separate buildings, then you have a whole lot of different situations, especially for transport. I talked about an expandable design. Again, the two courtrooms are that unfinished or shell space. So while the walls are there, you can come in, and actually it can also be used for other things, if that makes sense. So you're not necessarily stuck with a fixed configuration because it's an empty shell. We talked about the 16 beds. Originally it would be 72 beds to build this, and then we can double bunk them so that you can go to 88 with literally as simple as, you drill some holes in the wall and you put on another bed. I mean, it's that simple. So that's one good quick expansion. I touched on in that layout slide too that the 32-bed pod can be added on. The way the architect has designed the housing now is it takes advantage of that day room, it's called, where they actually are out of their cells into an open area and just puts on another area right there. So nothing major is needed to do other than you have to build it, but because the foundations and everything are there, it makes it so much easier to do and less disruptive when the time comes. So that gives us 120 beds, and you remember the numbers from that slide because I know you were all making notes. We're 77 beds in 2036 and 93 beds by 2046. So we think this is both expandable but also functional. Now, let's say we end up somehow getting on the Dallas County bandwagon and we just grow like the weed that we want to be besides Norwalk. The rest of us have to grow. Again, there's another way we can add actually 31,000 square feet by putting on a third floor. And you go, well, how does that work? Well, again, because of the way the configuration is, the architects have figured out for a fairly nominal cost, literally $150,000, we can build the infrastructure such that a third floor could be added in the future if it's needed. Now, some people say, well, save the money. Well, yeah, but again, $150,000 on a $29 million project is a really good investment because if you don't do it, you're guaranteed to never have a third floor. But if you do it, you have the option, and it's a whole lot less expensive because nothing's going down every year as we go on. And I talked about the secure parking. All right, so what's all this cost? Well, as I said, no free lunch. So when we look at the costs themselves, whoops, there we go. That's projected, right now, obviously we have to pay our current bills because we're paying out of county to house 40 inmates. So the bond proposal includes a per thousand rate of 95, but also as we include the rollbacks, you can see from the table what the impact would be, say, to a $100,000 home. Your taxes the debt levy would be $5,304. So, and then the multi-residents and the others are in there too. So from a monthly perspective at, $442 or $884 if you happen to have a $200,000 valuation, it's a fairly reasonable cost. It's not the lowest that's out there based on the numbers that were done, and it's certainly not the highest that's out there either. So from the standpoint of we think we have something reasonable out there, the financial people at least agree that it does have those characteristics. All right. I talked about the design meetings are going on. If the bond gets approved, obviously, then we would go right into kind of overdrive on the rest of that. There's also some talk at Indianola doing a cityscape planning session this fall to sync up with the project. So they want to do some changes in that square anyway. Well, again, good time to get them all done and not have to tear it up a second time. We continue to meet, as I said, every week to 2 weeks with the sheriff, the courts, and the county attorney to refine things. But again, when it's, should it pass, then we've got to go a lot faster because the bids for the diagrams, the designs, the floor charts, all that stuff has to be done to go out in January so that we can get those bids back in a favorable climate. It may give us some more time, too, to address some cost issues with these tariffs because obviously those have changed our perspective a little bit, too. There's a lot of steel that goes into a jail, as you might expect. Not into bars, however. It's into structure. So, and then, like I said, the idea would be that construction could start as early as April, but it would be about an 18 to 20-month build time so that, it wouldn't be done or opened. Best case would be about May of 2021. Okay, so that's a lot to digest. Now, the interactive part of our program.
Can I make a few comments?
Absolutely.
Okay, so just a few additional comments. One thing that wasn't mentioned that Northland has indicated is that, and this is a really important statistic to, or a bit of information to get, is that our current costs, and if we continue transporting prisoners to other locations, other counties, that in a 20-year period of time, transporting the prisoners is going to cost us more than it's going to cost us to build this building and do it on our own. So, another thing would be that, as Randy said, the initial levy is going to be 95 cents per thousand. Northland also indicated that as soon as Microsoft is built and gets on the tax rolls, that 95 cents will actually go down to 84 cents per thousand. A couple other things. In public meetings that I have been at, the sheriff has indicated that this facility is going to meet his needs. The courts have also indicated that that facility is going to meet their needs for quite a long time. And from the data that we have, it's at least 30 to 40 years that this facility is going to be able to service Warren County. And hopefully it'll be more, but depends on how much we grow. Let's see. I think that's all I had. So we'll go ahead and open it up. What questions do you have? Wait, if you could wait for the microphone. Yep, you're going to have to be on a mic, but.
You mentioned the increase in cost and all that. What is the projected life of this payoff? I mean, is the 20-year figure you're talking about, it's going to take this increase in taxes, it's going to take us 20 years to pay back the.
Yeah, it's going to be a 20-year bond.
Right.
That's what we're using as a baseline, as the 20 years, and that's where we came up with the, they looked at the 20-year projection for transporting prisoners, and that was going to be more than the 20 years, what it's going to take to pay off the bond.
The bond, is that for the building and loan, or does that include new communications as far as new 911 systems, new radio systems, or other data systems that are going to go in? And then my other question, if we add this type of a jail, what kind of extra expense is the county going to have with additional deputies or other personnel needed just to maintain that jail, and then the operating cost? Building alone sounds like a good deal, but what other dollars going to add to it if we install this type of jail?
Good question. For E911.
By the way, Norwalk does not use Warren County E911.
That is true. Norwalk does not use. Norwalk uses Westcom for their emergency services as far as dispatch goes. We don't use Warren County. Warren County Emergency Management is its own taxing entity. So to purchase the communication system will be an expense or a tax for emergency management, not for Warren County for the building. There will be space, as Randy indicated, there will be space in the basement of the new building for dispatch and for the E911 system. And whatever equipment that emergency management purchases will be able to go into that facility. Do you want to go over the cost of additional personnel?
Oh, yeah, operations-wise, well, before it closed, we had, 3 jailers. As you might expect, the ratio of one jailer to the number of prisoners or inmates is a structured number as well. So when you start saying that, we have 40 now, which we do, and by the time it's built, we'll probably be in the 45 range, then it's going to cost more, absolutely. And that's part of why the combined facility adds some efficiency there, because the way that, again, the architect structured it is that it minimizes all those costs. But there will be operating costs, and those are factored in. They're not part of the bond. They'll just be part of the budget cycle and process as we go forward.
Isn't it 2 deputies required on site at any time for an active jail now? And at about $43,000 a year per deputy, if we increase that, it'll cost more than 6, but 6 new deputies would cost us another $250,000 a year.
Well,
or
actually,
we have to take the resources away from our county.
Northland factored that in, though, didn't they?
Part of the cost to go forward is actually using civilian jailers instead of deputies, because we want the deputies out on the road doing their job. So one of the things they were actually working with was bringing in more civilian jailers, so they're lower cost, and you also don't take the deputies away from the roles that we hire them for. So you're going to need more staff. There's no question about that. But the good news is they won't have to be deputies, and the number that are required will still be met because the sheriff's office is co-located with the facility. So, great question.
Yeah. Also, Northland, I believe, added those costs into their calculations, and it still shows that building the facility and manning it is still going to be less costly than transporting prisoners out over that 20-year period.
Yeah, and when we talk about transport too, the daily cost that we pay to other counties is fairly well known. It's in the $50 a day per inmate. So that's that one you kind of get your head around easy. But the challenges and the expense comes when, like right now, Jasper County, as I said, was going through some issues. So they need more, for their own inmates, so we get what's left. Well, we're now actually we're back transporting to 3 different jails instead of going to Jasper. At least then you could plan your expenses better, but now when you're going, to the other locations too, because of the space limit, it adds both to risk and to cost, so.
Does the cost of the building, is it about the same whether it's built on the square or it's built on a park-like setting off in other parts of the city area?
Generally, the square footage cost is the stage that we're at. It's going to be very similar, except obviously we don't have to pay for land. So,
right.
So we've been in this range, both square footage-wise, and I think they've become very creative both about the building itself and how to keep the, because usually when you go up, it costs more than when you go out. And they've done a good job of keeping the costs within what we can, manage.
So the cost difference is going to be, if we put it on 20 acres of a park-like setting, there's the additional cost of the 20 acres of park-like setting, the parking lots, the extension of all of the utilities. And if it's off of existing paving roads, we would have to pave gravel roads and extend all of the utilities to the site as well.
If the site is not in a way that has all those features, yes, which does add to the cost.
And I think the architect had 6% for that land cost.
I'm not sure on quoting that off the top. This focus is just on the square. So it's definitely, though, there is cost.
Let me get up here first. Get my exercise today.
Hi, my name's Amber Martinez, and I don't have really well, I do. Can you tell me why you guys waited so long to try to build a new jail?
Would
Yeah, I guess I wouldn't say we waited so long. I think while we know it's taken a lot longer than all of us would like, the challenges that we face throughout the process, just haven't, we're finally at a place where we think we have a viable solution. So the original bond had some good qualities as well. But again, when we went to find land, I mean, there's over 20 parcels of land were looked at, different designs for the building. I mean, we've been working on this quite a while and trying to come up with a solution that both the voters would agree with, but also that the users of this space could do too. So.
Okay. Well, I just want to tell everybody that I think that it's imperative that you guys build a new safe jail, because I am living proof of what happens when someone escapes Warren County Jail. Scott Grimes hit me head on during a police chase August 22nd, 2016, and ruined my life. And I am so mad. If this meeting would have taken place a long time ago, y'all would have built a jail that was safe and secure. I would still be working. I would still be living my life the way it was. And I just want to tell you guys, it's well worth the money to build a new, safe, secure jail. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will there be any local option sales tax used for funding of the jail?
Local option sales tax. I don't.
No, that's not factored into this, huh? Right now, again, as the mayor said, we're focused on the Microsoft funds coming online, but the local option sales tax is already, I think it's part of the budget already, since it did pass as well, especially in the county, because I actually live in the county on one of those infamous roads, and trust me, we need all the money in the county we can get to.
I just have a couple of questions. The exercise area, I didn't see no exercise area listed on your blueprints or drawing there for the prisoners. And then I was wondering, I didn't see no lawyer inmate rooms, separated rooms where they can have their meetings prior to going to court and stuff. Usually a lot of those jails will have that. Just wanted to see if you can clarify that. The other one comes with, since you're doing the ground tunneling and putting on parking, if you've considered the CO2 along with the runoff water usage, like downtown, they have a lot of issues with water getting in there. If you protected yourself on that section, that's all I'm worried about.
Yeah, great questions. And we're working on the actual floor chart, which will help with some of the other things from, there's meeting rooms, there's inmate interview rooms, there's a variety of those rooms that you're talking about, including the, obviously kitchen facilities, laundry facilities. The exercise yard is another one that sometimes people have an interesting image in their head. Usually these things are like 10 by 10 concrete rooms, and that's it. There's no window, there's no exercise equipment. Again, unlike those things you think of at a prison, there's nothing in them because they don't want them to either hurt themselves or hurt someone else. So while there will be an exercise room, it's not, again, there's no equipment, there's nothing else. So it's a bare space that's just not their cell. So, yeah, and actually in this case, it'll be on the second floor. And one of the things that probably didn't come through as well on the diagrams, and that the actual windows that you saw on the facility actually were, whoops, oh, sorry. You guys have the other one up. It's okay. It's actually an apron wall is called, so that the window looks like a standard window, but the actual cell is inside there 5 feet. And that area allows for all your plumbing chase, everything else to be outside the protected area for the inmate. So neither the maintenance people have to go into those spaces, and nor does the inmate have access to the outside. So it really adds another layer of security. And if you haven't seen a modern jail, it's pretty amazing, because while there's always 3 separate doors to get anywhere, the 4th door is actually controlled only by the sheriff's department. So the jail staff control the 3 inner doors, and then there's always another one. So another fantasy of the movies is there's no riots that take over the jail, because it don't happen. It just can't. So. Oh, gotcha. Yep. Yeah, so over here is as I said, the sheriff's area is down here, so nice, you know, nice area of windows, but up here is the housing unit. And in all these, it's the same situation where it looks like there's these big windows, which there are, but that isn't what actually gets into the cells. This is just, you know, what you would call a nice decorative effect to make it look like a modern building, but also be very visual, so.
I have a question. Is the 29, close to $30 million, does that include demolition, of course, for the old courthouse?
Yes, it does. It also includes mitigation of the asbestos in that facility.
Good.
So the most efficient method to approach that will be to move everyone out, which means 911 dispatch moves out to their temporary site in the admin building. And then we move the sheriff's office out as well, because it's about a third of the cost to do it if no one's in the building than trying to do it while people occupy. So.
And my other question is, has the Indianola Chamber of Commerce weighed in on this? Do they have an opinion on all the construction? And I'm guessing they want this to be there, or what?
The Indianola Chamber of Commerce greatly wants the building to be built on the square.
Okay, I figured. Thank you.
Does the state of Iowa provide any funding for this project?
No.
Luke, down here.
Is there any green space left after this building is built? And what about parking?
Great question. The new building, as you might expect, is larger than the footprint there. And I don't think that one's on the site, but I'll add that now that you say that. So the east lawn is well maintained. It does get a little bit smaller, and certainly the north and south get smaller. And then there's also would be some new room, because the parking lot that the sheriff has today would be able to be green space. So it's definitely got an impact to the square, but the intent is to keep as much, both the mature trees as we can, but also keep the green spaces open as we can for the activities that are down there. So.
I heard 70%.
Yeah, I wouldn't be quoting the right number, but do you know, Kurt, the green space percentage remaining?
72%. I don't
know an exact percentage.
Or 77.
Right, the building is sited 15 to 20 feet closer to the east curb. And if you actually walk by out there, it's just past the current sidewalk that's nearest to the building. Yeah. So you can kind of get an idea where that new wall or the new side would be. So
I think it's 77%.
Yeah, I just don't have that off the top of my head, but we'll have it soon. That's part of one of the things we've asked about, because people also want to know what the configuration is, because even if it's X percent, well, it's going to be different, because you're used to, you know, fairly good expanse on the north and south, and as you can see by the renderings, that's not there. So.
Also, something you might address is tearing down the courthouse. Will that have an adverse effect on the other buildings on the square?
Part of the selection for the contractors will be how do they deal in these environments. In other words, you know, as they bid, they're going to have to know that going in. Right now, based on the construction management company's DCI's input, with 2 lanes of traffic, we'll probably have to close the inner ring of parking, you know, to be able to, but keep both lanes of the road open, and also keep as much of the mess down as you can, but realize that, you know, it is a construction zone. So we're going to be interested to see how they, you know, present how they do this, both in a historic setting and in an occupied area.
And I believe the architect had addressed the point that the building did not have deep footings, so it coming down would not have an adverse effect for the buildings around the perimeter of the square falling apart either.
Right. The current expectation of the building is it'll come down fairly well. Again, we'll mitigate the asbestos first so that the demolition can be done, but it's certainly going to be torn down. It's not an implosion. It's none of those kinds of fun things. It, you know, like they did at the Y. It's going to be torn down and be pretty boring. So.
Randy Mayer, thank you very much for the presentation. Very helpful to see it all at one time in one presentation. I'm wondering if any thought has been given to just setting this off until after the first of the year, It appears from a distance the supervisors have really had trouble bringing this project together to date. Now suddenly it's coming together, and we're in a transition with the Board of Supervisors. And the board that exists now that is actually going to approve this will not be the same board after the first of the year. Was there any thought given to setting it off until the new Board of Supervisors is actually sworn in, or at least one member for sure, and have the new board look at the proposal perhaps afresh, maybe ending up in the same place you're at right now? But it seems like things came together in a hurry all of a sudden, when for years the supervisors had a lot of trouble reaching a consensus.
A great question, and I guess I would say it hasn't been a hurry. You know, again, having worked on this thing since 2016 myself, we've been plodding along, usually trying to overcome the next roadblock. So I think this one was one that we had a situation and we thought we have a solution. And I think that, you know, as much consensus as you can get is there. I also think that, again, you know, as we've tried lots of things, if we're waiting for perfect, progress is unlikely. So I think that, you know, while anything's possible, there's no question of that. The other issue is if we waited till January, the timing is an important aspect to the actual construction bidding process. If you let for bids in January, which is what they call a favorable bidding client, you get much better pricing and much more better delivery than if you do it other times a year. And of course, if we wait till January for the bond, well, then you're essentially going to lose all of 2019 because you won't be able to really get everything done and start groundwork before winter strikes, and then we continue to go on. So, but good points. I think it's like anything. There's always something that's going to be out there, and I've been doing this particular project longer than I want to. But at the same time, there's always something that's the next thing to. It's so easy to say no, except the cost, the risk, and the danger to both the inmates and the deputies and the public.
One question that wasn't answered would be Deb's question on parking. The existing parking, once the building is done, the existing parking or the future parking will look just like it does right now. So none of that changes.
You'll actually pick up some parking in the basement, won't you?
Well, and that's the advantage, is that there will be secure parking down in the basement of the building, and for both law enforcement and for the courts. So that will open up quite a few spots on the square itself for those cars. Okay.
Yeah, currently, there are deputies that park in that parking lot on the west side, plus the supervisors, plus there's what, 12 spots out there or better?
I don't think the supervisors park there anymore.
No, yeah, the supervisors aren't there. Currently
they're
it's
currently
just
over
the
at the
deputies.
admin building.
Yeah. Currently it's just the deputies and the dispatch 911 folks. But again, with 35-ish or more, 35 to 40 is what we're ballparking right now. That secure parking will be, again, for the occupants. So all those folks won't have to park, you know, anywhere else. The other thing, too, I think I forgot to mention on that part, the way the parking is done is that it's housed. So in other words, you see a door, but that keeps the elements out, that keeps the cars out, that keeps the rain out. So even when there is, you know, heavy rains and things like that, it's designed such that it doesn't actually penetrate the building. So again, you'll just see a door, and unless you have a magic access card, it won't open for you. You can honk all you want, but there's no parking.
Thank you very much for your presentation. The other thing is we have been involved in bonding issues for years and years, also involved, but I think it's time to move along and get this one in process. Thank you.
Squeeze through your chief.
I think it's quite clear that you've put a lot of thought into the location and the cost of it and presented that. I guess, Mike, I'm just curious about what type of people end up in that jail. Are we jailing people that should be in broad lawns for mental health, and also the repeated offenders for drunk driving that should be in broad lawns? And do judges consider that, you know, how many rooms they actually have left at the end before they say, well, I think let's release them back instead of jailing them? I'm just curious about who's staying there.
based on the research I've done, because I have no ability to speak on behalf of the courts, we have a fair amount of drug charges. We have a fair amount of theft. There are some other fairly bad people, but they usually end up in prison. And I think right now there has been no limitation on, again, the courts and the deputies are going to follow the law. They're sworn to uphold it. So they're going to put people in jail that belong in jail. And I think that's the thing is now as we look for bed space, that's the challenge that we're faced with. And I used Jasper earlier because we were at least able to go to one jail for everybody. And now we're back to going to multiples, which just adds cost and complexity to the situation. So going forward, I think there's going to be lots of things. The 5th District, in fact, happens to be one of the largest using the ankle bracelet program for certain types of offenders. Now, it's not necessarily in Warren County, but it's out there. There were about 1,000 people on the program last year. They don't really state anywhere publicly if it's working. They just state, here are the people and here are the facts. So I haven't heard how it's working, but again, things will continue to evolve, I think, in those spaces. The judges, for example, are doing video arraignment now, which was not something they did before either. So that first appearance is done like you've seen by some of these people on TV in some of the bigger states that, some of the judges still go to the courthouse or the Fusion building, but, they can do it another way too, so.
Hey, Randy, Aaron DeCook here from Norwalk. Couple quick questions. The first one, I noticed the 95 cents per thousand, and that's a Northland number, but was that run at 19 years or 20 years? Because I met with Northland a month ago, and they did a 20-year projection. It was a little lower. And then at the Indianola meeting, they did 19 years, and it was a little higher. Do you know what figure they used for your presentation?
Not off the top of my head, but I can verify it. So I actually have a call tomorrow with them because I want to go through the current expense model that they put together, as well as where they saw their cost increases, because we factored in a 2% population growth, and they did models of 2% and 3% just to kind of throw out some options. So
thanks. Next one, I think it might be helpful for the audience to know what the cost was for June, like just the housing cost at Jasper County. I'd heard it was somewhere in the 52, 55 range just for housing. I mean, that might put things in a little bit of perspective. I'm not saying it's the end all and be all, but it's expensive to transport.
Yeah, it's very expensive. And I mean, if you do some basic math, 40 people a day on average, right? $50 a day, it adds up very quickly. So, and then it varies too, as you said, because like any of these, in fact, it goes a little bit to the previous question, there's a little bit more activity from the DUI perspective on weekends. And so it goes up on a Friday, goes down on a Monday, and those kinds of things.
My last question is, do you know when the internal renderings will be done? I've seen external stuff. I just haven't seen any courtroom 1, 2, 3, 4 looks here and
I do not yet, but our next meeting is on Thursday, so I can get you an answer to that.
Thank you.
Just kind of follow up on what he said there. You threw out about a $50 a day, what it costs. At $29.9 million, $50 a day, that pays for about 32 years worth of putting away prisoners. So, I work communications, I do 911 systems. I'm not debating that our courthouse is in solid need of repair. The facilities aren't good and that, but basing the cost savings off of inmates, I don't think really squares up. At $100 a day, based on 50 inmates a year, that's 16 years for $29.9 million. So when we're throwing together that the cost is the savings for what we're doing in housing and transporting inmates, I don't think that adds up to where the numbers really need to be.
Okay, so, right. So half of the $50 to $60 a day cost is just for the bed. You also have to add in costs of personnel time to get them there, cost to get them back. Once they've been once they've been arraigned, they probably are going to go back again. And so there's a lot of cost associated with transportation that is not included with that $50 to $60 that really start to get you know, it snowballs a lot. And so you mentioned at $100 a day, it takes 16 years. I think that's where you're at, is we're probably paying about $100 a day per prisoner to house outside of Warren County. When you add in the room, the transportation costs, plus we just bought a van. We helped Warren County buy a van. I think the van was $30,000. So as you look at how many prisoners, the growth, you know, you're going to have to buy 5 or 6 vans over the period of 20 years to be able to transport them back and forth. So you add up all those costs, and that's where, and Northland did that, and that's where that number's coming from.
And the 50 doesn't stay stagnant. That's going to go up each year.
Well, that is true as well. 50 is what we're paying right now, and as we transport to other counties, it could easily go up.
That's also considering the fact that there may not be a place to take them, because Jasper County's now full, and we're taking them other places. So when Marion County goes up, where's the next place we're going to use?
Right.
Yeah, and as the chief said, the challenge of finding beds is if they're available. And right now, again, obviously Dallas County is using beds because they're, you know, they don't have space, but so do other counties. And the other challenge that goes with those costs is, like this week alone, there are 18 court appearances. So they're going to go, you know, I know of 18 they're going to get, bring to the court, take back to the jail. I mean, so it's a constant expense that goes with it. But you also have all kinds of other things that go in there besides the staffing, the fuel costs, the vehicles. I mean, you look at the mayor mentioned the van, but you also realize that, you know, our cities and county cars are putting more miles on them, having to do all this transport at different times for different reasons as well. So, because again, if it's one guy I got to go down to Madison County to get, well, they're not likely going to go with the van, but they may. I mean, again, it's such a logistics thing. We're not really in the shipping business, so maybe we need to talk to UPS. I don't know. So, Luke.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. You walk really fast, Luke, I got to tell you. My name's Ed Cool. I had the honor of being the police chief here for about 15 years, so I'm a little bit familiar with the situation. But the other thing, I just want to talk to you as a private citizen, just me as one of your neighbors. I have grandchildren in this community, and I have children in this community. Now, we've got a lot of frustration today because there's a problem that hasn't been dealt with over the last 30 years. That it? Government's really good at that. I mean, not doing a hard vote, kicking it down the road, that's pretty easy, right? But we've reached the end of that road. So now it's time for a hard vote. We've got to make that vote one way or the other. Now, myself, I don't want to pass this problem on to my grandkids. And it seems to me, from the information that's been presented here, if we decide not to do it, we're going to have additional expense, and we're going to continue the problem. If we decide to do it, we've solved the problem, or at least maybe for 30 years or so. And I think I would rather hand that to my grandchildren, that I solved the problem, as opposed to just saying, hey, I didn't want to deal with it. That's kind of where I'm from. The other comment that I would have is, I don't believe we've got a county board representative here anymore. But I would really like to see the county explore the use of the TIF leverage money. And I would like to see them present that publicly, the effect that might have on, you know, what we're looking at, how much that would take care of. Because I think that's pretty important, too. And any other sources that might be available that, you know, we haven't thought of. I would sure like to appreciate the county board to consider that. And if they do that, if they could make that available to the public prior to this election date on this bond. But thanks for letting me speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yep, thank you.
You've talked a lot about the jail side. Could you talk a little bit about the court side and how much we're spending by not having our court open?
Yeah, well, obviously the current space is a leased facility that we're able to accommodate what I'd call kind of a minimum situation to get them back to the county. But you have 2 jury courtrooms that are quite small. I mean, they're they're not even 1,000 square feet. So when you start talking about what you can even do in our county to try our own cases, you're limited there. The new jury courtrooms, at least the 2 large ones, are 3 times that size, so that you can both do all your operations that you need, but also have flexibility of the space to be, size up or size down. And that, I think, is a key piece, just because, we have to go to other counties now if there is a big case or if there's something that requires it. You also don't really have the space to do jury selection. I mean, there's really a lot of limited functionality while they're getting by, and they appreciate at least being back in the county, as do we having them. It's still very tough to do what they're doing. I mean, and as I said, the clerk they're very limited for space out there too. They're actually still using some of the storage in the old courthouse just because there's no way they have room for what they have there. So, but I think that's part of the design and the meetings that we've had to talk about, well, it's been good to sort of have a different space to be in. They got to go out to other counties. Some of them worked there remotely, so they saw kind of how things were, and that's been very valuable as we've looked and said, okay, how do we want to configure ours? So it's been a good. The cost per month at Fusion is roughly about $10,000 a month. So, which again is, it would continue until we either have a new facility or it continues. Now, we can buy the building, but right now it's premature. Because obviously we don't want another building on the county property rules if we don't have to, especially if we can get something passed and underway, then we let that one go back into the public market. So,
you showed mature trees on your slide and everything. Has anybody looked at the security aspects of those mature trees as they grow and being able to secure your surrounding building with mature trees blocking the view?
I'm not sure I'm following you, but from the jail and courthouse perspective, these things are built really solid. So if it falls on them, it's not going to hurt a darn thing.
I'm talking about an outside entity coming towards you that you can't see because your view from...
Oh, no, I see what you're saying. Yeah, the building will have full video surveillance as well around it, so no one will approach that building without being seen. So.
But if you have a big tree in the way, it sort of blocks your view.
Well, I guess I'm not assuming an aerial descent or something like that, but that even has cameras on the roof, actually. So,
from a federal perspective and everything, in our facilities, you can't have any vegetation other than grass.
Oh, I got you. Yeah. Well, part of the intent was to maintain the square's character as much as we can as well. As I said, we lost one in the storm, but those mature trees have been on that square in some cases as long as the original courthouse, which burned to the ground. So I think it was just more of an intent to keep it as inviting as possible and realize that while it is a justice center and a court facility, it's still a member of the community and a valued one at that.
This $50 a day for the bed, and I think you said $36,000 for a van. Can't rule out, you gotta have somebody drive that van. What's it cost to demand that, you can spend $100 a day to have somebody drive that person back and forth too. So this $50 is kind of an underrated figure. We're probably approaching $200 a day just to transport one prisoner.
When we look at it all in, we generally refer to expenses that people, we pay out and people can understand, but you're absolutely right. The transport individual, because there has to be 2 in the vehicle at all times as well. But the other side of it is every time an inmate comes and goes, state code requires two deputies to both load and unload them. So it's not just the driver. I mean, it's a bunch of these. But one of my takeaways is to see if I can go back and say, what's a usable number to call our average cost per inmate per day? Because even if we use Jasper as one location, we still should be able to come up with something that helps. Because I agree with the mayor, I'm sure it's at least 100, and it probably is more than that when we think about all in. The other thing we have to pay the other counties is any medical facility costs as well. So because you have to provide that by law, even if I don't have a medical issue while I'm incarcerated, I still have to have it available for every inmate, and it's a per inmate fee. So we'll get some more numbers on those. Good question.
One other comment, I agree with Ed on the idea we've put this off for too many years. It's a golden opportunity. I think we need to step up and do something about it now and don't worry about what if next year. So my 2 cents worth.
Thank you.
I had one other question. I see that we're at about 40 inmates right now, and it's getting built to 72, and I understand why. That makes sense to me with the projections. Has anyone looked at the figures for if we were on the winning side of that trade, taking inmates from other counties and charging them 60 or 70 bucks a day? Because if you take 30 times 60 times 30 days, you're at 54 grand. I mean, that goes a little ways towards paying the bond back. Has that been run in any of the figures or not?
There is nothing in the current figures for renting beds out, and the reason is fairly straightforward. Today, we're the primary renter in the counties that we're in. So assuming again that the bond were to pass and we build our own facility, well, again, these other areas are going to have a lot of beds available that they've been used to getting paid for. And another meeting, somebody said, well, why don't we go for federal inmate contracts? Because they pay anywhere from $85 to $105 a day. However, again, the problem is with other counties now having spare space, those contracts are done on a bid basis. And I guarantee you they're going to bid very aggressively because they've been used to our income coming to pay for their facilities. So in fact, Jasper County is actually finishing out an unfinished or a shell space that they had to house 8 inmates because we're paying for it. So, and the deputies and the sheriff said, we're okay with it as long as we get a plaque, and they said, no, it's our jail. So.
Randy, I did get a text message while I was walking around from somebody that asked a question if the county could establish a TIF district to fund the project.
Yeah, I'm not aware of that, but.
Yeah, where? Because it would have to be within the actual county, and there's nothing really. A TIF comes in when there is actually something built and there's an increment there, an incremental increase in value. So, and it would have to be in the actual county because cities have the authority to TIF areas within that city. So like when you're looking at Microsoft is already a TIF district for West Des Moines. The advantage of doing the debt and with the bond issue is that there is a certain portion of debt service that, well, all of debt service will get paid out of the TIF district for a particular taxing entity. So so this is to you. It would be interesting to see from Northland an analysis of all of the TIF districts that are currently in force in the different cities of Warren County to see what, because to see what difference would that make, because right now they're not getting that money. So, yeah, that's what you were looking at.
Good point. I like that. Yeah, and we'll look into it because I think the other aspect, and Aaron, you mentioned this, and I didn't address it. We didn't count the Microsoft contribution coming yet because it's not here. So we didn't. To me, it felt like it was deception to say you can count on it being lower because of Microsoft. Because again, that's 2 years away from any of the revenue coming in, and other things may happen. So we represented the project as it is on its own, just so people knew what to expect for the cost. Good points. I like that idea, though.
Can you remind us all what needs to happen for this to pass? I just don't remember the protocols.
Oh, sure. Yeah, because it's a county event, essentially, we have to have 60% approval, or actually 60.1% approval for it to pass. 60% of those who vote, that's correct, not of all the citizens. That's a good point, because obviously at around 50,000 people, that's quite a few, but no, it's 60% of those who vote. Good point.
The other element that Chief Ed had mentioned was the county establishing a TIF. However, the jail or the Justice Department has to be within the city. So trying to establish a TIF in the county really couldn't be done to benefit. We could take the existing TIFs and see about proportioning off a portion to go toward the Justice Center.
Yes.
So that would have to be done under the city administrations. And some of the county, which there's a way then to do it from that standpoint.
So let's go through an example real quick. Let's look at Windsor windows. Windsor, the ground was originally probably assessed probably $10,000 to $20,000. Okay, for their piece of it. The building that they built, last I heard, I think is going to be assessed at $11 or $12 million. So that increment there right now is TIFed, and so our levy is approximately $45, and that includes all the taxing entities, including the city, the school, the county. About $9 of that is currently going to the school through debt service, instructional support levy, and PEPL. The city of Norwalk actually gets the rest of it at this point in time. When the county issues any debt, because they don't have any debt right now. When the county issues debt, and let's say it's the 95 cents for the courthouse jail, that 95 cents will no longer come to Norwalk. It'll actually go to the county. So so there are dollars that are being given to the city right now by the county that if they had gone into debt that they would be getting. So those are the types of dollars that I think Northland needs to look at within TIF that might just decrease the 95 cents down lower than what they're saying. TIF's a complicated beast, let me tell you.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the communication system that's going to be put in, and can they jump onto Norwalk's existing, or does it have to be something separate?
Well, the 911 Commission is actually working that project separately, and the RFPs aren't due back until November, so I can't tell you a lot, but I know one of the options was Westcom. I also know the state system was another option, as well as a third option was to build our own. So they're all on the table, but again, the information won't be back until November for anything to even be looked at. So we'll be outfitting the space from the standpoint of 5 dispatch locations. There are 3 today, so there'll be 5 stations and preparations for that equipment, but the equipment's not part of this project.
And hopefully emergency management will land on something, a solution, and we'll have that ready to go to put into the new space.
Rick Graves, Norwalk. This isn't about how much money. This is about the security of your grandchildren, your children, yourself. This is about how we live. And if you don't understand that, you need to grow up a little bit and start looking at how we live and how the world has changed. This cost is expensive, yes. Ask the lady in the back. Grow up, folks. We got to do this.
I did want to echo that TIF district is a little tricky to use for public buildings sometimes. I mean, Madison County is going through that. We taxing wind turbines to work on public buildings and ambulance barn, et cetera. I did want to say the bonding environment's pretty favorable right now. If you're going to bond, now is a pretty good time to do it, really, because it's relatively low cost compared to other times.
Yeah, and with the county having no debt and a good reserve level, it's also got our rate down very, very good. In fact, that's That's a big issue from the cost of what this will be, so.
Okay, what other questions do you have? All right.
There's if you want some more information, we do have a website up. You've seen it scrolling by there, wccitizens.org. It has the content, obviously, from tonight's presentation and some more. And we're always looking for feedback on how to improve that to make sure people have, as the mayor said when we started, a good foundation of education to make an informed decision. So vote August 7th.
Yeah. And then one more thing that I forgot to mention is that on July the 5th, the Norwalk City Council passed a resolution endorsing this particular plan and funding mechanism. So wanted to mention that the council has passed that endorsement. There's other cities within Warren County that have already done the same, and there's others that are looking at it at this point in time. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate you being here and wanting to be involved and listening to us, and get out and vote one way or the other. Vote on August the 7th. Thanks.